Well, good morning. This is Chuck Hyde, Vistage Chair here in Northwest Arkansas, and I'm pleased today to be joined by a Vistage Chair in Central Arkansas, down in Little Rock, Barry Goldberg. Barry, good morning. Thanks for making time today. How are you doing today?
Good morning. I'm pleased to be here, and I'm doing great. Thanks.
One of the things, Barry, you're the first of our interview series that our members have not met directly, but you're a Vistage Chair, and I want to bring you into this conversation for lots of reasons. But one thing about people that they may not know or remember about Vistage Chairs is that we all did something before becoming chair, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's what qualified us to be a chair, is having sat in the seat in executive roles, leading companies, and you certainly have done that. So by way of introduction, you spent your good part of your executive career starting in business development and in the publishing industry. You have had P&L responsibilities for a Fortune 400 company's operating unit, so you know what that feels like. You founded your own consulting firm, really focused on customer-based strategic planning. You had a decade with the UN Peacekeepers, extensive travels throughout Africa and Asia. You've been an executive coach with Marshall Goldsmith Associates and a Vistage Chair for, is it 7 years? Is that right?
I believe it's over 7 now. I got my 5-year plaque here, but I think I'm heading towards 8 years this year.
All right. So, a ton of executive experience, and that's really why I want to tap into you today, because I want to talk about some executive disciplines and really drive toward decision-making and some things that you've experienced both in your career, but also experiencing now in your chair practice and your coaching practice. And so again, thanks for making time. I just want to start, again, I always want to do this is, again, how are you? And how has the COVID-19 crisis impacted you personally?
Well, you got an hour or two. We can, in some ways, actually, minimally, because I did a lot of work this way to begin with. Okay. And because my office is in my home. So some of that is normal. My wife runs her business from across the hall. So in that way, it's the same. I do miss my focus time out. I miss meeting face-to-face with my members. And candidly, I miss the travel that goes with my other client work, all of which immediately ceased and desisted when this started. I've managed to steal a few days away every couple of weeks out on the Washita Trail, and that helps me get grounded. I won't talk about where, but I can go park, walk in, hike 5-10 miles in, set up camp, stay for a night or two, hike back out. Won't see another soul the whole time, and that helps me stay grounded as well.
That's good. Well, I think we're all, those of us like you that have a role that has us out. Right, we're all anxious to get back out, but one of the things we've been talking with our members about is self-care. So thanks for that plug there about what you're doing for self-care. I've got my own practice as well that we need to be doing during this time when that rhythm and flow that we've been used to has been disrupted. Right. So I want to start, Barry, with a topic that you've been studying, and there's layers of this that we may not be able to get to today, but that is just the act of listening and the skill of listening. And you said that listening is a purposeful act.
Yep.
And requires both practice and presence. And I know it's a topic that you cover, particularly in retreats and spousal retreats, things like that. But I want to transfer what we know about listening to the context of executive leadership, particularly in crisis and as we emerge from it. I mean, listening to our markets, listening to our customers, to our team members, our peers in a Vistage group. Talk to us about that idea of presence and listening and the practice it takes to do that, the intentionality.
Well, I think the place I'd start is exactly what you just said, in a time of crisis. Because the interesting irony is that when we are in stress, when we are in a time of crisis, that's the time when we're most easily hijacked out of listening because we want to move in and take control. And in fact, it's the time when we need to be most present for what's happening and able to choose our response. So listening, when people think about listening, and this is the fundamental part of one of the Vistage talks I do. You know, we can start by making a list of listening skills. You know, I do. I start with every group with, okay, how do you know when you're really listening? And nobody has any trouble with all of those things that they know. You know, I'm focused on them. I'm not interrupting. I'm not working on my phone. I'm not doing that. And how do we know when someone is really listening well or is not listening well? Well, they're on their phone and they're doing that. Good. We got this nice little list. So we know how. That's not the issue. Once I've got the list, I can say, okay, look, this is easy. Do that stuff. Don't do that stuff. Okay, good. We're done. Please give me great scores, right? That's it.
Yeah.
The question is, what's in the way? And what's in the way has to do in two broad areas. One is the way our brains work, just from a practical point of view.
Okay.
And the other is our emotional capacity to remain present.
Okay.
So let's talk first about the brain stuff. We'll knock that off really quickly, right?
All right.
We come in, and well, anyone who thinks we come in tabula rasa into the world doesn't have any kids. But if you have kids, you know we come in with a little bit of personality. You know, we're all a little different. But our brains immediately start cataloging all of the information that comes our way. That's good, that's bad. You know, we don't have words like that's green, that's blue, but I like it, I don't like it is where we start. It makes me feel safe, it doesn't, right? And over time, we create this enormous file cabinet of data. And the older we get and the more educated we become, the more sophisticated the data can be. And it's actually more like a tagging engine than a file cabinet. Because now, when we're in conversation and you say to me, oh, my wife and I we're planning to go to Paris. My brain kicks into gear, and every association I have with Paris, or anything French, or French fries, or French toast, or French kissing, or anything that it's running through all that to see what's going to be useful. And while it's doing all of that in the background in a remarkably efficient way, I'm now focused, all that brain power is focused inside, not outside.
Okay.
And so I'm very likely to not be very thoughtful about my response. And my typical first response would most likely be, oh, yeah, I love Paris. We went last year. My wife really loves Paris. And I'm off to the races with my experience before I've even realized I've opened my mouth.
Okay.
So our brain doesn't help us there unless we train it to provide the information without taking over the conversation. The other challenge for our brains is average person in the US anyway talks at roughly 250, 300 words a minute.
Okay.
Around the world, you'll see upwards of 450, in the South, a little slower than the North here, et cetera. There's a range.
Sure.
That's about it. Depending on whose research you look at, the brain's ability to process language is in the 2,000 to 2,500 word a minute range.
Okay. So almost 10x then.
Almost. And so all of that margin acts like a 6-year-old with a double espresso in a room full of puppies. Running around looking for all of the information, and it's looking for something to do. So it's looking for every association, which then takes us down our own internal storyline, which means we're lost, right? So you want to go to Paris, isn't that wonderful? You know, we went last year and geez, I remember my wife was wanting to not go, and I went to the Louvre, and I got the whole story going in the background. Meanwhile, you're talking, I'm not listening.
So it sounds like this whole, just the way our brains function, and it's resonating because it's what we do. It's what I experience and what I do all the time, what I'm guilty of. That's one of those things that hijacks or gets in the way of our ability to listen. I'm interested. The other thing you talked about, Barry, was this. Was it emotional capacity to sort of?
We'll get there.
Okay, sorry.
We'll get there because there's one other thing about the brain that you have to understand, and is that our brains are designed to filter. right? So we don't see, there are patterns, and you can see this, there are a whole bunch of visible optical illusions that will show you this, that our brains can only process information in a pattern it recognizes.
Okay.
So if it's outside the pattern, we miss it. We filter very quickly because we're missing a lot of the raw data. And all of this is healthy. This is what helps us to survive.
Okay.
So all of that runs up to a fact that we're only getting some of the data only in the way that we associate it typically, and that it's colored. Other than that, we're perfectly objective and accurate.
Okay.
And it's what keeps us alive and sane. Right? So,
Okay.
so that's one part. Then we get to the emotional side. And this is where actually, so you talked about spousal retreats. I love spousal retreats because we can work with a conversation. You know, when I'm working with a group, somebody's in the room and we're going to work with a conversation they've had, but the other person isn't around. Right? So we're only getting one side of the conversation.
Okay.
And when I get spouses together in a room, provide them a structure for having a conversation that they maybe haven't been having or haven't been having very well for 5, 10, 20 years sometimes. Give them a tool to have it differently and send them off for half an hour and say, okay, go try the conversation again, but let's use this framework.
Yeah.
The last retreat I did, we had 10 couples. 3 of them did not come back until dinner, and they reported that they were busy. I'm okay with that, you know, that's fine.
Yeah.
So it has to do with the distinction between our emotional reactivity and a focus of attention that's about choosing an outcome. Right? An outcome focus is one of the sort of key disciplines here, and especially for executives under stress. What's the outcome I want here? And how do I work backward from that, rather than starting with what makes me feel good in the way I react?
Okay.
Right? So if you think about a conversation you've had recently, or maybe one that happens over and over and over, where you find yourself saying the same thing and it's not working out, we begin to see the pattern. So let's see, let me take an example from today. My lovely bride, who's in the office across the way, comes in and says, oh, well, we had a call this morning from the air conditioning people.
Okay.
You know, would they need to come in and do service? And can you be available this afternoon?
Sure.
Right?
Very normal.
My immediate emotional response is, I'm preparing for a conversation with Chuck. Could we? Right? So now I'm flustered. Maybe I'm angry. At the least, I'm a little irritated. I know I shouldn't be irritated, so maybe I've got some shame going on.
Okay.
If all of that drives my response, it's not going to create a very good outcome.
Right.
Right? So, oh, and by the way, I'm feeling silly because I should have had the door closed while I was prepping. Right? So all of that is all about me. If that's what drives my response, we can imagine then the kind of response that I would make. Not now, I'm busy, I'll talk with you later, I can't do it today.
Right.
Close the door on your way out, please. Right? Now, how's she gonna feel being treated that way? And what's the response that comes back? And these are not always purposeful, outward facing. It's not like, okay, purposefully irritable. There happen in natural conversation. And when we map that out, it becomes a self-sustaining pattern.
Okay.
It goes back and forth, back and forth. You know, when I do these in a workshop, I always ask for an example.
Yeah.
I had a whole group of engineers, which is, okay, so I'm going to make a stereotype here. A room full of introverts.
Guilty.
There we go. And I'm looking for somebody, 280 of them or something. And I'm looking for someone who's willing to give us a conversation we can map. As an example, silence, absolute silence. Finally, after begging and pleading for a while, I had one guy who said, well, I got one, we could talk about this. My wife and I have been back and forth about, do we put a deck on the house? Yeah. Great. How long has this conversation been going on? 29 years. Right? And the reason is they're not talking about putting a deck on the house. They're talking from a position of how do I defend my turf?
Okay.
Right? And therefore, each of them feels unheard. Each of them feels exasperated. And so no engagement happens. This business of understanding the difference between reacting and choosing a response that gets me to an outcome I want or that is desirable in the situation is a fundamental way we demonstrate we're human. Okay. That moment when I can say to myself, oh, isn't this interesting? My wife just came in here and I feel really pissed. I'm angry here. Now, how do I choose to respond? Well, I didn't have the door closed. She's just trying to solve something. And there's no sense making this into a bigger deal. This is true for little things and for very, very large things. The same pattern evolves. So how we demonstrate we're human is we take a breath and we choose a response, not based on winning or based on shutting down, but based on what serves the system, what's the outcome that's best for all concerned.
So that to me, Barry, is what I found so fascinating about this, because we could, whether it's decks or air conditioning repair or something that we can, and it's more relationally driven, or something we just take into our businesses in the context of like, hey, this customer just did this, or we just lost this account, or our employee base is doing this because of our return to work practices, all the decisions. And that's where I want to go next. But like, if we're not practicing presence in any of those range of decisions, we could get into this loop, right? That's not going to serve us that well. And I think that's the application of this concept seems so broad and so deep that's just something that I think I was going to ask you later, but just what our executives and our members need to be mindful of is really being present in the moment and really having this awareness of where your responses are coming from. Is that kind of fair?
Absolutely. And I think it's a fundamental way that we demonstrate that we're human, both when we fall off and when we can discipline ourselves to stay with it. That it's not about my feeling better. And of course, we hear that, with in a leadership style where someone is busy screaming or focusing on dictating terms, where it's all my way or the highway. When we're in stress, when we're responding from stress, we have three possible responses. They are the same three that all organic matter on the planet has. The lowest altitude or the most sophisticated CEO. Okay. We can fight, we can run, or we can give it up and blend in and get small. And that while those things look different in nature than they do in the business office, they happen every day, right?
Yeah, so let's use that then as a segue into decision making then, because I think that's at the point of decision making. That's what our leaders, your members, my members, we're all faced with this every day in a ton of different contexts. One of the things that Vistage talks about is that we're about decision optimization, like making the best possible decisions. And we're not going to do that if we're not doing some of these disciplines like you're talking about. So if we think about the responsibility we have to make decisions, the disciplines like this, to me serve as both input and positioning to equip us to make the best decisions in the moment, because they're going to have great implications, for us, for all those that we lead. What would you want to highlight or remind our members of in terms of how they should be approaching decision making now, and particularly going forward as we begin to see kind of things shift in a new direction?
Yeah. Well, so I think a fundamental tenet of leadership here is decision making in service to what?
Okay.
Is it in service to my feeling better? Um, so if we look at the low side of task stuff,
Yeah.
that's the fight response. I'm wanting to be in control so that I feel better, right? Whereas looking at the system as a whole, and not only that, systematic processes that are manageable, repeatable, delegatable, take me off the center of attention.
Okay.
And for a lot of leaders, the distinction, do I understand whether I'm doing this so that I feel better or so that the organization is better, is a big start. The same is true on the relational side of things. The low side is getting small, abdicating. When we see decisions made based on good relations at the cost of getting work done.
Okay.
Right? So there's a difference between having good relations, making that part of the culture, and not getting work done or not getting systematic processes in place because we can't have the difficult conversations. It's impossible to talk about what's challenging or even taboo without anger or shame. Now we've got decisions made on, we see this all the time, Southern nice. Everybody's just nice and nothing gets done. So the top side of that is having a healthy relationship where it's okay to talk about the difficult, the challenging, and even the taboo. And where we do that constructively to find a solution. So the real distinction there is, again, am I driving my own comfort? Am I deciding for my own comfort? Or am I deciding for the well-being of the institution and the organization, allowing that power to come forward and make things happen? And unfortunately, a lot of us grew up on a model of leadership that said, hey, it's got to work for me, my way or the highway, all of that. So we don't see it. And I'm not talking here about being so open-minded your brains fall out. I'm not talking about abdicating responsibility. I'm talking about not letting anxiety, fear, and even anger drive the decision making.
Right, right. Well, and it sounds like what triggers for me, Barry, here as we kind of wrap up is how important work I've done, how important it is for, if you and I are in conversation, and let's assume we're very present, we're practicing listening, and we've got a decision to make, or one of us has to make a decision and the other is trying to provide input into that decision. If we can understand and agree this concept of in the decision in service to what, like if we understand what that is and have agreement and alignment on that, then you don't have to question my motive on whatever I'm saying. And I don't have to question your motive because our motive is essentially the same. We're going to do what's best for the organization or best for our customer, whatever the case may be. And if we are pursuing that and can trust that that is on the same page, then I think, would you agree that that positions us to listen more effectively, to be more present, to have the hard debate with the right intent and outcome in mind?
I would absolutely agree. And I would add that this is where some skill in understanding triggers, how people get triggered, is really useful. Because if we don't have the same picture of the outcome, but we're agreed we're working shoulder to shoulder instead of across the table, then the question is, can I make inquiries without triggering you? Can you make observations without shoving me into my corner? So a couple of very specific little tools here.
Okay.
One is the difference between an assessment and an assertion.
Yes.
So an assessment is a statement that cannot be proven or disproven empirically. You might call it an opinion, right? So if I say, it's hot in here, well, we can't measure that. I can say I'm hot.
Right.
An assertion, on the other hand, may or may not be true, but it can be proven or disproven empirically.
Okay.
If I say, man, it's got to be 80 degrees in here, we can measure that.
Yep.
Okay? So a breakdown, or one of the surest ways to trigger someone in a conversation is when I treat my assessment like it's an assertion.
Okay.
right? Todd here, and I go turn the thermostat down, right? I worked with an entire office of people who the wars were over the thermostat.
Oh yeah,
And
absolutely.
it was all right. So an example from the office, we can't afford to do that, right? Well, I've treated my assessment like an assertion,
Got it.
right? Which is very different from that's not in the budget today,
Right.
right? I've made a factual statement and treated it like a factual statement. It's changeable, it's malleable if we agree to change it. But when I treat my assessment like an assertion, it's almost certainly going to not work out well in terms of flipping someone out of being engaged and in the conversation.
Yep.
Um, and it's the most common and most insidious conversational thing that happens because we don't pay attention to it.
Interesting. No, that's a really, really neat difference. So thanks for pointing that out. So Barry, a ton of stuff here. We could go for a long time on this, but I really appreciate the time, the insight, the experience you provided, because I think you've given our members some things to think about and really heighten our awareness of where we are, this idea of presence. And then I love this last little bit on assessment versus assertion. That these are things that we can actually put in practice and I think are essential given where we are and the responsibilities we have as leaders today. So thanks again for the insight. Any last minute before we sign off?
The only last thing I'd say is that a lot of this comes out of work by people who are way smarter than me on stages of adult development, and how we move from that early stage of being dependent on the world and then reactive to the world in order to get love and acceptance, and into self-authoring, into where we're trying to create something.
Yeah.
And leaders who will sustain, especially when we're tested in this, are the ones who have a relative balance between task and relational capacities, but their focus is on what we're trying to create rather than being in reaction mode to what's happened, to problems in the environment and what's happening that's negative. We have to deal with those, but if that's where we live, we're not making any progress. We're putting out fires. And the same is true in listening. Am I focused on what we're trying to create together, or am I focused on my feel good? It's a fundamental distinction for leadership, and I think really defines it in the 21st century.
Awesome. Well, Barry, again, thank you for sharing your time and your insight with us. Look forward to our contact as we go forward. We continue to connect ourselves throughout the state of Arkansas and our Vistage membership. And so thanks again, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks for doing this, Chuck. I appreciate it.
You bet.
Cheers.